My sisters and brothers, once again, good morning. As we re-enter the liturgical time of ordinary time in our church year, we continue this week hearing the story of the prophet Elijah in his travels amidst the people of God, amidst the people of Israel, urging them, inviting them back to greater fidelity, to adherence to the law of God, and to be faithful to their covenant, to return to the Lord with their whole hearts. Of course, he faces stiff opposition from those who are idolaters, those who worship false gods, pursue ways of life that really are not life-giving at all. And we have in Jesus a similar message. Jesus, of course, comes to interpret, to reinterpret, to teach the authentic message of that law of God. But he too is faced with those who are on the verge of becoming idolaters. But it's not necessarily those who just worship other gods. It's those who have taken the law itself and turned it, rather than a pathway to God, into an idol in itself. Because the law itself can become an idol if we take it out of its proper context and out of its relationship with God. If we don't find God at all in the law, if we simply find in it a method of judgment and condemnation of others, to assert our own self-righteousness, then it too just becomes another idol that we have fashioned in our own image and likeness, rather than as a pathway to God, to assure our relationship, proper relationship with God, as it was meant to do. Now, we heard yesterday that Jesus is very clear, even though he is critical of those who turn the law in on itself or in on themselves, that he has not come to abolish the law. Rather, Jesus comes to fulfill it, to bring it into its fullness, and also to invite us back into proper relationship with God through the law. The law exists to put us into right relationship with God and one another. And Jesus, in a way, is not just abrogating the law. He doesn't do that at all. He says quite the opposite. He's moving in another direction. He brings it to fulfillment, and he radicalizes it in a way that was unheard of for the Jewish people at the time. As he preaches in today's gospel, he says, "You have heard it said that thou shalt not kill, but those who harbor anger and resentment within their hearts will be liable to judgment as well." He encourages that we seek out reconciliation before we even approach the altar of God, for otherwise we approach in a state of hypocrisy, or that we are not truly living up to the law of God, which is a law of love. Because when we are invited to love, when we're invited to live and to act and live out of the freedom of the children of God, out of the freedom of the law of love, it's a much more demanding way of life than simply living up to a duty or an obligation. The law of love demands that we go even further, and living out of love, it's a greater master to have than mere duty, but it can also be more demanding of us. That's the law that Jesus invites us to live from. It's what the law of God points to and what Jesus brings into its fulfillment, that we don't turn the law in on itself or simply make it a reflection of my own desires, my own thoughts and ideas. Because more often than not, as we've seen throughout the history of the people of Israel, as well as our own church history, it can then be used as a tool of marginalization, of judgment and condemnation, of exclusion. But as we see in the person of Jesus, throughout his own example and ministry, as he is teaching and preaching and interpreting this law, teaching to the people of God what it's truly about, Pope Francis tells us, Jesus Christ went out to everyone without exception. He invites them into that covenant, into that relationship, even if they have failed in the past, even if they don't quite get it right now, that they're invited back time and again. Go and sin no more. This law of love is one that invites us constantly to examine ourselves. Where am I failing to live up to that law of love? Where am I making the commands of God and the law of God just into a tool or a reflection of myself so that I can assert my own self-righteousness? Jesus gives us a corrective and teaches us a still better way, not a law of mere duties and obligations, but a much higher law, that of loving others. Amen.